More than a decade after Michael Jackson's passing, one question continues to captivate millions of people around the world. How could one of the greatest entertainers in history, a performer whose career redefined music, dance, and live entertainment, suddenly be gone at the age of 50? While official investigations, court proceedings, and countless reports have documented the events surrounding his death, public curiosity has never disappeared. Every year, new documentaries, interviews, and discussions revive the same mystery, encouraging fans to look back at the final chapter of Michael's extraordinary life. For many, it isn't simply a story about a global superstar. It is an attempt to understand how a lifetime of unprecedented success eventually led to one of the most widely discussed moments in entertainment history. In the years since 2009, enormous amounts of information have emerged through legal proceedings, witness testimony, medical records presented in court, and interviews with individuals connected to Michael's final months. Together, these sources have helped construct a far clearer timeline of the events leading up to his death than was available during the first days after the news shocked the world. Yet, despite that growing body of documented information, public debate has continued. Different interpretations, rumors, and online theories have often overshadowed verified evidence, making it increasingly difficult for many people to separate established facts from speculation. That is why understanding Michael's final story requires patience, careful examination of the available evidence, and a willingness to distinguish documented events from assumptions that developed later. This documentary is not about sensational claims or unsupported theories. Instead, it follows the documented timeline surrounding Michael Jackson's final weeks, the people who were closest to him during that period, and the investigation that unfolded after his death. By examining the available evidence step by step, a clearer picture begins to emerge, one that is both more complex and more human than many people realize. Before the courtroom, before the worldwide headlines, and before investigators began piecing together what had happened, there were ordinary days filled with rehearsals, preparations, and enormous expectations. Those final weeks would become some of the busiest of Michael Jackson's entire career, setting the stage for events that would ultimately change music history forever. On the surface, Michael Jackson's final day appeared to follow the demanding routine that had defined the weeks leading up to his planned return to the stage. Preparations for the This Is It concert series were consuming nearly every waking hour. Rehearsals brought together dancers, musicians, choreographers, lighting specialists, costume designers, and technical crews, all working toward an ambitious production that promised to showcase Michael's greatest songs with new creative ideas. Those who saw him during rehearsals described an artist deeply focused on perfecting every detail, carefully reviewing choreography, stage effects, and musical arrangements. Like many large-scale productions, the schedule was intense, and every day carried enormous expectations. Few people involved could have imagined that these rehearsals would soon become the final public record of Michael Jackson preparing to perform. After leaving rehearsal, the evening gradually became quieter. Away from the cameras and the excitement surrounding the production, Michael returned home to continue what had become a familiar nightly routine. According to evidence later presented during the investigation and court proceedings, medical care was being provided as he prepared for another demanding day ahead. The following morning, events took an unexpected and tragic turn. Emergency responders were called to the residence after Michael was found unresponsive. Despite extensive efforts to revive him, he was later pronounced dead at the hospital. News of his passing spread across the globe within hours, bringing disbelief, grief, and unanswered questions. Fans gathered outside hospitals, television networks interrupted regular programming, and millions of people struggled to comprehend how someone preparing for a historic comeback could suddenly be gone. In the hours immediately following Michael's death, uncertainty dominated public discussion. Early reports contained limited verified information, while investigators began documenting the scene, interviewing witnesses, and collecting evidence to determine exactly what had occurred. Medical professionals, law enforcement officials, and forensic experts would soon begin reconstructing the timeline of Michael's final hours in extraordinary detail. That process would ultimately lead to months of investigation, and one of the most closely watched legal cases in modern entertainment history. Before any conclusions could be reached, however, investigators first had to answer a far more fundamental question. What decisions had been made behind closed doors during Michael Jackson's final weeks, and how had those decisions shaped the events that unfolded on that unforgettable morning? Those questions would soon become the focus of an investigation watched by the entire world. As investigators carefully reconstructed Michael Jackson's final days, their attention increasingly turned toward one critical area: the medical care he was receiving during preparations for the This Is It concerts. The months leading up to the planned performances had placed enormous physical and emotional demands on the production. Rehearsals stretched for hours, every creative decision was examined in detail, and expectations from fans around the world continued to grow. Like many performers preparing for a major tour, Michael relied on medical professionals to help manage the pressures associated with an intense rehearsal schedule. But as investigators reviewed witness statements, medical records introduced during legal proceedings, and expert testimony, they discovered that the decisions made behind closed doors would become central to understanding the events of June 2009. What initially appeared to be a routine examination quickly evolved into a much broader investigation into the standards of medical care surrounding one of the world's most famous entertainers. During the investigation, prosecutors and medical experts focused on the sequence of medical decisions made in the hours before Michael was found unresponsive. Evidence presented during the subsequent court proceedings examined medications administered, the environment in which medical care was provided, and whether accepted standards of practice had been followed. Specialists explained to the court how each decision could influence patient safety, emphasizing the importance of appropriate monitoring, emergency preparedness, and established medical procedures whenever powerful medications are involved. Throughout the trial, both prosecution and defense presented expert witnesses who interpreted the evidence from different perspectives, allowing the court to evaluate the circumstances in detail. Rather than relying on speculation, the legal process centered on documented testimony, forensic evidence, and expert medical analysis that had been carefully examined under oath. As those findings became public, they fundamentally changed the direction of the investigation. Public attention shifted away from rumor and toward the evidence presented inside the courtroom. The central question was no longer simply what had happened, but whether the decisions made by those responsible for Michael's medical care met the professional standards expected under such circumstances. That question would ultimately become the foundation of one of the most closely watched criminal trials involving a public figure in modern history. For millions of people following the case, the investigation represented more than an effort to explain a tragic loss. It became a search for accountability based on documented facts rather than public speculation. And as prosecutors prepared to present their case, the world would witness an extraordinary legal process that examined every decision, every timeline, and every piece of evidence in an effort to understand exactly how history had changed forever. In the hours following Michael Jackson's death, what began as an emergency medical response quickly became one of the most closely watched investigations in entertainment history. Detectives, forensic specialists, and medical examiners immediately began the careful process of documenting evidence, interviewing witnesses, and reconstructing the timeline of Michael's final day. Every detail mattered. Investigators examined medical equipment, prescription records, witness accounts, telephone activity, and the sequence of events inside the residence. Because Michael Jackson was one of the world's most recognizable public figures, authorities understood that every conclusion would face extraordinary public scrutiny. Their objective was not to respond to rumors circulating across television and the internet, but to establish a factual timeline supported by physical evidence, professional analysis, and sworn testimony. The investigation would ultimately become one of the most comprehensive inquiries ever conducted into the death of a modern entertainment icon. As the investigation expanded, detectives interviewed the people who had been closest to Michael during his final weeks, including members of the concert production, household staff, security personnel, and medical professionals. Their statements were compared with electronic records, medical documentation, and forensic findings to identify where the accounts aligned and where additional questions remained. Specialists reconstructed the events minute by minute, seeking to understand not only what happened, but also why certain decisions had been made. Every new piece of evidence was carefully reviewed, alongside expert medical opinions, before investigators reached their conclusions. This methodical approach required months of work and demonstrated how complex, high-profile investigations can become when they involve extensive documentation, numerous witnesses, and significant public attention. Rather than relying on speculation, authorities built their case through evidence that could be independently examined and presented within the legal system. As more information emerged through official proceedings, the investigation gradually replaced uncertainty with documented facts. Although public discussion continued to produce countless theories, investigators remained focused on evidence that could withstand legal scrutiny. Their findings ultimately laid the foundation for a criminal case that attracted worldwide attention, placing every major decision under examination inside a courtroom rather than in the headlines. For millions of people following the story, the investigation represented the first step toward understanding one of the most shocking events in music history. Yet the legal process that followed would prove equally significant. Inside the courtroom, prosecutors, defense attorneys, medical experts, and witnesses would present competing interpretations of the evidence, creating a trial that captivated audiences across the globe and forever shaped public understanding of Michael Jackson's final chapter. When the investigation concluded and criminal charges were filed, the story entered an entirely new chapter. What had begun as a tragic loss for millions of fans became one of the most closely followed courtroom proceedings in modern entertainment history. News organizations from around the world gathered outside the courthouse, providing daily coverage as witnesses, attorneys, and medical experts prepared to testify. Every hearing attracted enormous public interest because the case involved far more than a celebrity. It centered on questions of professional responsibility, medical judgment, and accountability under the law. For Michael Jackson's family, the trial represented an opportunity to seek answers through the legal system. For the public, it became the first time much of the evidence surrounding Michael's final days would be presented in a structured courtroom setting rather than through speculation or media reports. Throughout the proceedings, prosecutors introduced medical records, witness testimony, expert analysis, and forensic evidence in an effort to reconstruct the events leading to Michael's death. Medical specialists explained technical findings to the jury, while witnesses described what they had seen during Michael's final weeks and the morning emergency unfolded. The defense challenged aspects of the prosecution's interpretation, questioning witness credibility and presenting alternative explanations based on the evidence. As with any criminal trial, both sides were given the opportunity to examine witnesses, present expert opinions, and test the reliability of the information placed before the court. The proceedings unfolded over several weeks, allowing the jury to hear detailed testimony before reaching its decision. Every day revealed new information that helped the public better understand the documented timeline investigators had spent months assembling. When the trial reached its conclusion, the verdict marked the end of the criminal proceedings, but it did not end public discussion surrounding Michael Jackson's final chapter. While the courtroom answered important legal questions based on the evidence presented, debates continued across television programs, documentaries, books, and online discussions. Many people accepted the court's findings, while others continued exploring unanswered questions or revisiting the case from different perspectives. That continuing interest demonstrates how deeply Michael Jackson's life and legacy remain connected to audiences around the world. Even today, his final story is examined not only because of the legal outcome, but because people continue searching for a deeper understanding of how such an extraordinary career ended so unexpectedly. And as the years passed, that search gave rise to new interviews, additional research, and fresh discussions that would once again place Michael Jackson's final days under the spotlight. Although the criminal trial brought the legal proceedings to a close, it did not end public discussion about Michael Jackson's final days. In fact, for many people, the verdict marked the beginning of a much broader conversation. Fans, journalists, medical professionals, and documentary filmmakers continued examining the case from different perspectives, asking whether every question had truly been answered. Some discussions focused on the immense pressures surrounding Michael's planned return to the stage, while others explored the challenges of balancing celebrity, privacy, and medical care. Over time, interviews with individuals who had worked alongside Michael during his final months added new personal perspectives, but they did not necessarily change the documented evidence presented in court. Instead, they offered insight into the extraordinary demands that surrounded one of the most anticipated comebacks in music history. These conversations ensured that Michael's final chapter remained part of public discourse long after the courtroom proceedings had concluded. Another reason the debate has endured is the sheer amount of information available. Court transcripts, investigative reports, documentary films, television specials, books, and interviews have each presented different aspects of the story. While many of these sources rely on verified facts, others include personal opinions or speculative interpretations that have contributed to ongoing confusion. As a result, people encountering the case years later often discover multiple versions of the same events circulating online. This makes it increasingly important to distinguish between evidence that was formally examined during legal proceedings and claims that emerged afterward without independent verification. Understanding that difference helps explain why two people can study the same case, yet reach very different conclusions. The official investigation established a documented timeline, but public discussion has continued because individuals naturally interpret complex events through different experiences, perspectives, and questions that extend beyond the courtroom itself. Perhaps that is why Michael Jackson's final story continues to fascinate audiences around the world. It is not simply because of unanswered questions, but because it involves one of the most influential artists in modern history. Every new documentary, interview, or article reminds people of the extraordinary life that came before those final days. A career that transformed music, dance, fashion, and global entertainment forever. Yet, as the years have passed, researchers and journalists have increasingly focused on separating verified evidence from popular myths that developed in the aftermath of his death. That effort has become essential for anyone hoping to understand the case with clarity rather than speculation. And as we continue this documentary, we turn to one of the most important chapters of all, examining the difference between documented facts and the stories that have spread far beyond the evidence itself. In the years since Michael Jackson's death, interest in the case has never truly faded. Journalists, documentary producers, legal analysts, and fans have continued revisiting the investigation, hoping to better understand one of the most significant moments in entertainment history. While headlines sometimes suggest that a new mystery has been solved, most recent examinations have relied on evidence that was already introduced during the original investigation and court proceedings. What has changed is not necessarily the evidence itself, but the way it has been organized, analyzed, and presented to the public. With the passage of time, thousands of pages of court records, expert testimony, and investigative documents have become more accessible, allowing researchers to reconstruct the timeline with greater clarity. Rather than uncovering entirely new facts, many modern documentaries have focused on explaining the existing evidence in a more detailed and understandable way, helping audiences distinguish documented events from years of speculation. That continued research has also benefited from interviews conducted long after the trial ended. Individuals connected to the production of the This Is It concerts, members of Michael's professional team, investigators, legal experts, and others involved in the case have reflected on their experiences from the perspective of time. While these interviews provide valuable personal insight, they do not replace the sworn testimony or forensic evidence examined during the legal proceedings. Instead, they help explain the environment surrounding Michael's final months, the demanding rehearsal schedule, the enormous expectations placed upon the planned comeback, and the extraordinary pressure experienced by everyone involved. When viewed alongside the official investigation, these accounts contribute additional context without changing the core findings established through the judicial process. Together, they offer a more complete understanding of the circumstances that surrounded one of music's most tragic losses. Perhaps the most important lesson emerging from years of continued research is the importance of separating verified information from speculation. In an era where social media and online discussions can rapidly spread unverified claims, returning to documented evidence remains essential for understanding complex historical events. The official investigation, forensic analysis, and courtroom testimony continue to provide the strongest foundation for examining Michael Jackson's final chapter, while later documentaries and interviews serve primarily to expand public understanding rather than rewrite history. As new generations discover Michael's music and revisit the story of his life, the challenge is no longer finding information. It is knowing which information has been carefully verified and which claims remain unsupported. That distinction becomes even more important as we approach one of the most misunderstood aspects of this story, where facts and popular myths have often become intertwined in the public imagination. Few public figures have been surrounded by as many rumors as Michael Jackson. In the years following his death, countless books, documentaries, social media posts, and online videos introduced new claims about his final days. Some were based on verified court records and official investigations, while others relied on anonymous sources, speculation, or dramatic storytelling. As these different narratives spread across the internet, they often became difficult to separate from the evidence that had actually been presented during legal proceedings. This has led many people to believe that every new headline reveals a hidden truth, when in reality, many of the most sensational claims simply revisit old questions without introducing new verified evidence. Understanding Michael's final story therefore begins with recognizing an important distinction. Documented facts, established through official investigations, carry a different weight than opinions, interpretations, or unsupported theories circulating online. The official investigation and subsequent court proceedings created a detailed record built upon forensic analysis, medical testimony, witness statements, and documentary evidence. Those materials were carefully examined under oath and challenged by both prosecution and defense before conclusions were reached through the legal process. By contrast, many popular theories that emerged afterward were never subjected to that same level of scrutiny. Some were built upon misunderstandings of technical medical information, while others connected unrelated events in ways that could not be independently verified. That does not mean every question surrounding Michael's life has been answered forever, but it does highlight the importance of evaluating claims according to the quality of the evidence supporting them. Responsible research requires distinguishing between what can be confirmed through reliable documentation and what remains speculation. Doing so allows Michael's final chapter to be understood with greater accuracy while avoiding the confusion created when verified facts and unverified stories become mixed together. Perhaps the greatest challenge in preserving Michael Jackson's legacy is ensuring that his extraordinary life is remembered for more than the circumstances of its final chapter. His influence on music, dance, filmmaking, fashion, and global entertainment extends across generations and continues inspiring artists around the world. While it is natural for people to remain curious about the events surrounding his death, those events represent only a small portion of a career that transformed popular culture forever. By approaching the evidence carefully and separating documented history from popular myths, we gain a clearer understanding not only of Michael's final days, but also of the remarkable life that came before them. And when that broader perspective is considered, one final question remains. Why, after all these years, does Michael Jackson's story continue to resonate so deeply with millions of people across the world? The answer lies not in mystery alone, but in the enduring legacy of an artist whose impact continues to transcend generations. More than 15 years after Michael Jackson's death, public interest in his final days remains as strong as ever. Every year, documentaries, books, podcasts, and interviews revisit the same questions, while millions of people continue searching for a deeper understanding of how one of history's greatest entertainers reached such a tragic ending. Part of that fascination comes from the extraordinary contrast between Michael's public image and the private challenges revealed after his passing. On stage, he represented confidence, innovation, and seemingly limitless energy. Offstage, evidence presented during the investigation revealed a far more complex reality shaped by enormous professional expectations, relentless public attention, and the physical demands of preparing for one of the biggest comeback concerts ever attempted. That contrast continues to capture people's attention because it reminds us that even global icons remain human beneath the spotlight. Another reason the story continues to resonate is the scale of Michael Jackson's influence. Few artists have left a legacy that reaches across generations, cultures, and continents in the way his has. His music continues to attract new listeners. His performances are still studied by dancers and musicians, and his innovations in music videos and live entertainment remain influential decades later. Because his career touched so many lives, the events surrounding his death naturally became a subject of worldwide reflection. For many fans, understanding Michael's final chapter is not simply about examining a legal case or a medical investigation. It is part of understanding the life of an artist whose work accompanied their own memories, celebrations, and personal experiences. That emotional connection explains why discussions about Michael continue long after the courtroom proceedings ended, and why each new documentary finds an audience eager to revisit the story from another perspective. Ultimately, the lasting fascination with Michael Jackson's final days reflects something much larger than curiosity about a single event. It reflects the enduring impact of a man whose artistry transformed popular culture forever. While investigations and court records have helped answer many important questions, they represent only one chapter of a much longer story. A story defined by extraordinary creativity, relentless dedication, and achievements that reshaped music, dance, fashion, and entertainment around the world. As time passes, historians and fans increasingly recognize that Michael's legacy cannot be measured solely by the circumstances of his death, but by the remarkable body of work he left behind. And as we conclude this documentary, we turn to the final chapter, not to revisit the tragedy, but to explore the legacy that continues inspiring millions of people and why, despite everything, Michael Jackson's influence remains stronger than ever. As we reach the final chapter of this story, one reality becomes unmistakably clear. Michael Jackson's legacy was never destined to be defined by the circumstances of his death. While the events of 2009 remain an important part of his history, they represent only a small fraction of a life that permanently changed music, dance, filmmaking, and popular culture. For more than 4 decades, Michael pushed creative boundaries that few artists had ever imagined possible. He transformed music videos into cinematic productions, redefined the scale of live concerts, and inspired generations of performers through his relentless pursuit of excellence. Today, millions of people around the world continue discovering his work for the first time, proving that truly extraordinary artistry does not disappear with time. Long after the investigations ended and the headlines faded, the music remained, and so did the influence of the man who created it. Perhaps that is why Michael Jackson continues to occupy such a unique place in cultural history. His songs are still played across every continent, his choreography is studied by dancers of every generation, and his innovations continue influencing filmmakers, producers, designers, and performers throughout the entertainment industry. Museums preserve his costumes, scholars examine his impact on modern music, and young artists regularly cite him as one of their greatest inspirations. Every new generation encounters Michael differently, yet they often arrive at the same conclusion. His creativity reshaped what a global entertainer could become. His legacy extends far beyond record sales or awards. It lives in the countless artists who continue building upon ideas he introduced, ensuring that his influence remains visible decades after he first stepped onto the world stage. In the end, the greatest lesson from Michael Jackson's story is not found in mystery, controversy, or speculation. It is found in the extraordinary body of work he left behind. His life reminds us that while public figures may face enormous challenges, their lasting legacy is ultimately determined by the impact they have on the world around them. Michael's music continues bringing people together across languages and cultures. His performances still inspire audiences who were not even born during the height of his career. And his commitment to imagination, innovation, and artistic excellence remains a benchmark for performers everywhere. History will always remember the questions surrounding his final chapter, but it will remember something else even more powerfully: the unforgettable legacy of an artist who forever changed the sound, the look, and the future of popular entertainment. For millions around the world, that is the story that will endure for generations to come. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this documentary, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss our next deep dive into the lives, careers, and untold stories behind the world's greatest entertainers. Until next time, thank you for watching.